Previously, on Palace of Mirrors, Darien killed Trollbreath to protect prisoners on the ship, which led to Captain Bluebeard opening up to tell the story of his youth and the betrayal that shaped him. And now, Palace of Mirrors, Season 1, Episode 16, written in ink. The storm in the painting swung the wooden ship up towering waves. The dark sky loomed over it, so that the only light on the ship came from the thrust of lightning stabbing into the sea. It looked hopeless, but still the men clung to the ship. How in all that water, deafened by the thunder, could they go on? What drove them through the storm? Bluebeard closed his eye as he finished speaking, but the echo of his voice lingered. The captain fidgeted with the box that held the reflective sphere. He had not set it down through his story. Darien waited for him to continue, but Bluebeard remained silent. In the end, it was Darien who spoke first. After all that, you're the one bursting out of the sky, burning homes and destroying lives. Bluebeard's eyes snapped open. What of it? I'm a pirate. It's what we do. Darien stood, his chest tight with anger, with sadness, with a frustration as deep as any ravine. You really don't see? Darien looked into the old man's face. Don't see what? Darien crossed the room to a porthole. Clouds swirled past, their fingers grasping at the window. Damn it! I'm your captain. When I ask a question, you answer. I always hated the clouds. They hid the stars. Who would I have been if I'd grown up with a sky, a real sky? Who would I be if I could have seen the stars every night of my life? Darien spun back to Bluebeard. A violent impulse gripped him, to take the captain by the throat and punch him in the face. It would be suicide, surely. But Darien couldn't stand the thought that this man had squandered the stars he had been given. No matter how sad a tale he wove, Darien couldn't forgive him. The impulse evaporated, though, as Darien looked at Bluebeard, who had slumped under the weight of his words. The captain, his back to Darien, looked out the window. His reflection in the glass, a ghost on the wind, looked back at Darien. I am what I am, he whispered, the fog of his breath frosting the window. I don't understand. How can you stand it? How can you stand becoming something like her? She took everything from you, and now you take everything from others. Bluebeard gripped the windowsill. I had to become her. His voice broke. It was the only way. The only way. I thought once the thing was done, I could go back. I was a fool. Once you walk the road I've walked, you can never turn around. He laughed softly and put his hand on either side of the window. He leaned his forehead against the glass and looked out with the only eye he had left. Darien wondered what shapes the captain saw in the clouds. What moments lived in that vapor, never to be forgotten, never to be lost. If it's too late for you to change, why did you save me? Why not string me up the tree and let me hang on the wind? Bluebeard turned and smiled, showing his teeth like a Ragnar cat about to pounce. He pulled Knight from the scabbard. The metal glowed with life all its own. How many times must I tell you? This sword saved your life. If you're as ruthless a man as you claim, you should have just taken the sword and left me to rot. Instead, you claim to want a story from me. But what does a cold-blooded killer need with a story? Bluebeard shook his head. You're mistaken, lad. No one needs a story more than a killer. Stories are all that keeps us going. He turned night so that reflected light spilled across the walls. This sword did save your life that day. Maybe the sword I gave you will save your life in what must come next. Dread gripped Darien's heart. It's true, we pirates flaunt the law, but we are not lawless. Rules bind us, rules older than the Empire itself. For your crime, you must face a trial. You mean, like with a judge? Darien knew little of trials. In Kathy's stories, they were just a blip on the way to more exciting events. Bluebeard raised an eyebrow. As the captain of the ship, I would be the judge. And as the judge, I would have no choice but to find you guilty. No. Your only hope is the justice of the sword. Darien's legs wobbled beneath him, and he gripped the hilt of his sword. Trial by combat. One-on-one combat, to the death. Trollbreath cannot fight for himself, so a champion will have to take up his cause. I believe it will be Fantasia. She hated the man, but she doesn't seem overly fond of you either. You also have the right to a champion, but I fear you will not find one on this ship. You must rely on the skills I have taught you. Darien looked down to his hand on the grip of his sword. It shook. I'll lose, he whispered. The wind roared past the ship, but within lay silence. Your cause is not hopeless, said Bluebeard. It's true Fantasia far exceeds your skills, but she is impulsive and ruled by her emotions. It's a weakness. As well, each combatant is allowed a second, someone to back them up in the fight. I don't believe Fantasia will choose one. She's far too arrogant. Darien laughed bitterly. You said it yourself. No one will take up my cause. No, I said no one would fight in your place. I believe there is a chance someone will stand as your second. Darien felt a surge of hope. Would you do it? Bluebeard smiled and shook his head. I would if I could, but as the captain I must retain an air of impartiality. Then I'm as good as dead. Darien thought of Marialla, far below the clouds. He thought of Cassandra in the bowels of the ship. He thought of his family, waiting at home for someone who would never return. He had considered the pain of death and the loneliness and the long darkness that waited on the other side, but he had never stopped to think about all the unfinished business of a life cut short, the unspoken thoughts, the projects that would never meet their end, and the stories never finished and never heard. Darien sat in an observation alcove. A bench ran along the wall below a curved window. Maybe when the ship sailed the stars, the crew would sit there and contemplate the vast expanse of space. But it was night, and in the clouds darkness cloaked the view. Darien thought of the dark he'd known in winter. The wind turbines had often frozen up with ice and snow, and lantern fuel had been a scarce resource, so some days the only light came from the cracks of the stove. Kathy's voice, his sister's violin, the steady breathing of his father. If it hadn't been for those things, Darien might have been a thing of ice and stone. He rested his face in his hands. What would Kathy think of him now? It's all over the ship that you killed Trollbreath. I didn't believe it until the captain confirmed it himself. Gent stepped up next to Darien and looked out the window. With his stink and that ugly face of his, I knew one of us would get around to it eventually. His lips quirked into a smile. Still, who would have imagined it would be you? Darien flinched away from the words. I never thought I would kill anyone. Gent laughed. Really? Seems to me all those stories you're all going on about featured heroes who killed an awful lot of people. Darien flashed a fleeting smile. Bluebeard says there has to be a trial, that I have to fight Fantasia, that I have to kill her. Yeah, he said something to that effect to me. I told him he might as well just put you into trial against a 500-foot fall out the airlock. You'd have a better chance. Darien looked down at his hands. I keep trying to tell myself this isn't the end, that I have some kind of shot to get through this alive. This won't be like it was with Trollbreath. He fought about as well as he brushed his teeth. Fantasia? She's something else. Dragoneye could defeat her probably, but I'm not sure anyone could defeat him. Personally, I wouldn't want to face her for all the treasure of Lost the Leviathan. A look came over Gent's face, like a storm against the horizon. He looked as though he wanted to speak, but for once did not have the words. Some mechanical part began to click deep in the ship, and Darien found himself remembering his mother's metronome. It had been carved from real wood, not the pitted cork wood of the fire trees, and stained so it seemed carved from ruby. His father never used the tool, and never allowed Sally to use it when she played her violin. It sat on a shelf, unused. Once a week, when he thought everyone had gone to sleep, he pulled it down and cradled it in his calloused hands. He dusted it silently, so gentle he could have been dusting a spider web, hoping not to break it. One day, while his father labored in the fields, Darien had climbed up on a chair and pulled it down. The cover slid open so easily under his small fingers. The metal bar within bore engravings of stars, and the weight had been carved in the shape of a bird. Darien released the bar, and the bird took flight. With a click clock, it divided time into pieces. Kathy had found him there, curled asleep in the chair with the metronome cradled in his arms. She brushed his forehead with the back of her hand and laughed quietly. If only your mother could see you now. She sat beside him and pulled him close. Your father bought this for her. Did you know that? No, I don't suppose you did. Your father doesn't like to speak of your mother, and it was a long time ago, before you or your sisters were born. Your parents took a trip together to the city, and your mother found that metronome in a music shop. She told me later that she'd never seen something so beautiful. It was part of another world, far distant, the world she'd always wanted to see. It was dreams and hopes and stories. Kathy reached out a hand and traced her fingers along the lines of the metronome. Your father didn't care about dreams or stories then any more than he does now. His feet have always been rooted in the soil. It's all he knows or understands. I know. That hurts you, my little space captain. Still, there's nothing wrong with being yourself. Nothing wrong with wanting the life you were given. Never forget that. She closed her eyes and sighed. Never forget. He bought it for her because she loved it. I can't even imagine what it must have cost. But he bought it all the same. Because he loved her. She would set it on the table as she kneaded dough. She hummed while she worked. Not songs, just the music in her soul. I wish I could listen to her voice once more. She rubbed tears from her cheeks and lifted the metronome from Darien's arms. You mustn't ever let your father see you touching this. Not ever, Darien. Some scars ache when bothered. Some scars ache worse than the fresh wound. He hadn't understood what Kathy meant about scars. Not then. Not until she died. Darien. Gent's use of his actual name drew Darien's attention. Let me ask. If it had been me, there in that cell, not Trollbreath, would you have tried to kill me as well? Darien thought of Gent's warning the first day aboard. He thought of the hours they'd spent together in the engine. He thought of the jokes they'd shared, and the times Gent had stood up for him in front of Fantasia. But he also thought of the rain pouring out of the sky, masking Tom's tears. He thought of Cassie's face, thin and frail, but resolute. He thought of the day Gent had offered to hang him beneath the summer sky. I would have killed you. He looked Gent in the eye. I would have killed anyone in that cell who meant those people harm. Gent laughed. You're honest. He gripped the window ledge and stared into the night. I'm not used to that, not from anyone who isn't the captain. He sighed, threw his hands into the air, and spun to face Darien. How does that old man always know exactly what to say? He left the room so suddenly, Darien didn't have time to ask what he meant. The pirate's footsteps faded in the hall outside, a metronome dying with every beat. Nausea washed over Darien. Once he had never imagined he would kill, and now, he knew, he would gladly kill again. He would do it to protect, but did that change the act? Did that keep his hands clean? Darien looked down at his palms. He had washed his hands, had scrubbed them, but he still felt the blood sticky and slick. The winter of the ship had settled into him, like snow crystals settling one on the other to create a blanket, cold and clean and heavy as ice. It had settled into him as winter had settled into his small body all those many years ago when he had been born to a mother who would never know him. Deathmask sat in the center of the dueling circle, his legs crossed and his eyes closed. His sword lay naked across his lap. He didn't crack an eye when Darien entered the room, only continued to breathe with a relaxed ease that would have been more at home in an open field on a lazy day. Despite that ease, he did not look vulnerable. The very line of his muscles promised movement, like the still surface on a pool of water before a storm. The ink on his face echoed this promise, like the dark clouds in the storm itself. Those tattoos had once seemed sharp and unyielding to Darien, a bramble across the pirate's face. Now, staring at them, Darien realized how wrong he'd been. The lines swooped and danced and curved. They had been the lines of Marialla's face the night they danced, and the curve of her shoulder as she slept in the basement. They were Bluebeard's quiet smile and the tears on Tom's face in the rain. Darien let out a breath, took a step forward, and the lines shifted before his eyes. They drew a road climbing up over a mountain. Flowers swayed beside the road, stark black in the ink of the tattoo. A moon broke the sky. A woman sat on the road and stared up, the black threads of her hair shimmering to match the tears on her face. A gasp slipped Darien's lips, and he took a step back. Do I so unman you? Deathmask opened his steel eyes. Do you see in my face one who will outlive you to see the stronger circle? Darien looked to the pirate's face, but the image had faded into the noise. He cleared his head and spoke. Bluebeard sent me to see you. A smile, colder than a glint in ice, twitched on Deathmask's lips. He expects Fantasia to cut you into ribbons and sends you to me, hoping I can do what he cannot. Deathmask stood with the slow grace of a seedling unfolding and breaking free of the earth. With that same grace, he raised his sword. The pirate held the blade perfectly still, the still of a child born dead, the still of freshly fallen snow. He waited a moment, and then quirked an eyebrow at Darien. Did Bluebeard send you to stare at me, or are you here to find your place in the circle? Darien looked down. He stood just within the sparring circle now. My place in the circle? Deathmask smiled. It was not a cruel smile, like the one Fantasia would have worn. It was not a shifting smile like Dragon Eye would have worn. It was not Gent's carefree grin, and it was not Bluebeard's wistful smile. When Deathmask smiled, it was the smile of stone, the smile of a man who had weathered many storms and who would weather many more. Never mind that. He motioned with his sword. Let's see what you can do. Darien drew the sword Bluebeard had given him. Deathmask bowed and pointed his sword to the floor. He looked up and met Darien's eyes. By the Mahaji, the strong stone shall stand the winter. Darien started at the words. Bluebeard had never spoken them. He blinked uncertainly. Deathmask continued to stare, obviously waiting for a response. I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. Deathmask smiled again, that smile of stone. Bluebeard sent you to me, but he didn't even school you in my ways. The smile faded, leaving what should have been a blank expression, but it was not. Hate radiated out from the pirate's eyes. It touched every feature of his face. Even the tattoos shifted beneath that emotion. I'm sorry, Darien whispered. The fault does not lie with you. Deathmask shook the emotion from his face, though Darien thought he could see it lingering deep in the eyes. The proper response when beginning a duel with one of the Mahaji is, by the Mahaji, the weak stone shall break. Darien spoke the words, and Deathmask rushed forward. Where Bluebeard had always moved deliberately, each motion a separate action, Deathmask flowed like water. His movements matched the music of sword meeting sword with extravagance. It seemed like the flourish should leave him open, but Deathmask's blade always found Darien's attack and turned it aside. You move like a toy with gears. Deathmask stepped back and shook his head. You should have died long ago to make way for the stronger circle. Darien took a deep breath and focused on meeting each of Deathmask's attacks. He found himself unconsciously trying to mimic the fluidity of Deathmask's movements, but his attempts only led to him tripping over his own feet. He couldn't seem to find the rhythm. It danced away from him even as Deathmask danced toward him. The pirate pushed in close, his face inches away, and Darien found himself staring at the mountain and the road and the woman in Deathmask's face. He pushed the pirate free, but he still couldn't take his eyes from those stark lines. When Deathmask flowed in for another attack, Darien gasped. The pirate's movements followed the road on his face. They followed the mountain lines. They followed the flowers. Most of all, Deathmask's every move seemed to follow the curve of the woman's face. Darien turned aside Deathmask's sword and drove him back to the edge of the sparring circle. The pirate's eyes widened, as though he were just now seeing Darien. He fell out of the ring and landed on the floor. A beat followed, the two men staring at one another, and then Darien reached out a hand. Deathmask took the offering. Who is she? Darien asked the question without thinking. Deathmask's grip tightened on Darien's hand. What did you say? Who is she? The woman on your face. Deathmask reached his free hand to his face, the way a man might touch a fresh wound, but his fingers curled away and into a fist before they could touch the skin. Woman on my face, he whispered. What does she look like? Darien frowned at the question, trying to understand it. Can't you just look in the mirror? Deathmask reached out and squeezed Darien by the shoulders. I said, tell me what she looks like. The skin beneath the tattoo had grown so pale, the ink seemed darker than night shadow. Tell me, I beg you. Darien started at the words, which sounded so out of place on the pirate's lips. She's She's standing on a path leading up into the mountains. She has this long black hair that's twisting out on the wind. He hesitated. She's crying, but she doesn't look broken. She looks stronger than the mountains. Deathmask, face distant, let Darien go. Stronger than the mountains. He collapsed to the floor in the center of the sparring ring. His sword rattled on the ground, forgotten. Darien could not help remembering Bluebeard's first lesson. Keep your sword close, and it shall keep you safe. Darien knelt, and the pirate looked at him with sharp eyes. You! He threw the word like a dagger. How can it be you? How could what be me? What have I done? Don't you know anything at all? He sighed. Bluebeard in his precious palace of mirrors. You know, in the days of old, the palace hunted pirates nearly to extinction. Still, he worships that broken husk. There were older powers once. There was the Mahaji. Before him, there was the Mahaji. The Mahaji. The word tasted strange to Darien. He almost felt he'd heard it once, but could not place where. It might have been a long-forgotten story. It might have been a book. It might have been a dream. Yes, I am of the order of the Mahaji. This tattoo is the mark of my order. I gave it to myself the day I became an acolyte. The ink holds great magic, ancient magic. You gave it to yourself? The tattoo must be done by the one who will wear it, or it will not show true. Again, he reached for his face, and again he pulled away from it. Why are you telling me all this? Deathmask caught Darien with a gaze and held him. Can it really be you? When I saw you face Fantasia, I knew you were not so weak as you seemed. Of course, with Bluebeard, it could not have been otherwise. He has a way of finding strength where no other would think to look. But never did I think you would be the one. Never. I'd always thought, if anyone, it would be Bluebeard. It would have to be Bluebeard. Sitting on the floor together, a sense of kinship struck Darien. Deathmask had not been kind to him, but he had not been cruel either. They'd had little to do with one another. All the same, listening to Deathmask, Darien felt their lives were linked, separate paths meeting at a crossroads. Do you know the captain well? Deathmask laughed. How well can you know the storm? The earthquake, the flood. He shook his head. Long ago, he came to the temple of the Mahaji seeking answers, seeking a way to his revenge. But rarely are the answers granted there, the answers one wants to hear. They strike at the weakest part of a person's soul. It is our way to crush weakness, in ourselves and in others. Most leave that place empty, but not Bluebeard. What answer he received I cannot say, but it forged him. He roared a challenge to every novice, to every acolyte, to every priest and priestess. It was a test of strength as hadn't been called for 1,000 years and more. We thought him mad. The Mahaji cannot be defeated. We kill the weak to make way for the ones with the strength to carry us to a better world, to the stronger circle. We dedicate our entire lives toward obtaining that strength. He closed his eyes and sighed. He slaughtered us all. All but you. I'd been away from the temple. When I arrived, the bodies lay draped along the walls. They had fought in duels, one-on-one, and one by one he had killed them. We had dragged our own dead from the circle. I walked by them. My family. I walked by them. He stood in the center, alone, breathing heavily. Blood splattered his clothing, but the sword he held, the same sword you hold now, was clean steel. He looked up warily at my approach. The fight lasted hours. I thought at first he would fall from sheer exhaustion, but he refused. In the end, I was the one to fall to my knees. Darien blinked. But then how did you end up here? Why didn't he just kill you, the same as he killed the others? Deathmask smiled that stone smile. I yielded. He closed his eyes. There is no greater shame, no greater weakness than a fear of death. And so the order of the Mahajee ended not in the strength of blood, but in the weakness of a word. They sat together in the center of the sparring ring. The hum of the breathing ship filled the space between them. Darien stared at the woman on Deathmask's face. He wanted to brush the tears from her, but they were ink, and they would be there always. Who is she? Deathmask reached up, and for the first time touched the tattoo. He pulled his hand back and looked at the fingers, as though expecting the ink to come with them. He squeezed his eyes tight, as though trying to hold something in. I never thought to speak of her to anyone again. His voice shuddered. She was the love of my life. Darien felt a sudden twist in his stomach. He killed her, didn't he? That black rage spilled out Deathmask's eyes again. He stood and stared down at Darien. Even though the pirate's sword still lay on the floor, Darien feared for his life under that gaze. Who are you to see her face? You! You cannot be the one. You can't. How can it be that you see her face? Darien raised his sword. Why shouldn't I see her face? It's there in ink for all to see. Deathmask laughed at that, a mad laugh that echoed like a scream between the walls. Darien took a step back, and then another, until he had his back against the weight machine. Deathmask continued to laugh, but in the end the laughter turned to silence. I don't understand, Darien said, wondering even as he spoke if he should just remain silent. Why are you on this ship? Why do you follow Bluebeard, if he did what you say he did? Deathmask's shoulders slumped. He spoke with all the strength of a child in the darkness. I yielded to his strength, and so I must follow. He leaned down and lifted his sword. It is the way of the Mahajee. Darien nodded numbly and stood there thinking he should leave, but his feet wouldn't take him from the room. It felt wrong somehow to leave without saying something more. It seems a strange way to me, he whispered. It is the only way. They stared at one another across the sparring ring, but it seemed to Darien more that they stared across a great chasm, a chasm as dark and deep as any he had walked beside with Tom. I'll never see the stronger circle. Not should I live to be 100 years, or 1,000, or 1,000,000. But I will find the strength to defeat Bluebeard. I will kill him with my own hands. I will not let anyone stand in my way. Sword at the ready, he advanced on Darien. The look in his eye was the look Darien had seen on the pirates' faces the day they found him in their storeroom. It was the look of a man ready to kill, and yet when he spoke, his voice was tender. Please, describe her for me once more. I beg you, weakness though it is. Darien stared past the hard lines of the pirate's face, past the rage in his eyes, past the creases and scars, past the graying hair. He stared into the image which swept across Deathmask's face and watched the image shift. The woman turned and faced Darien. "She's young," Darien said uncertainly. "Her hair reminds me of the night, and she's afraid, and she's sad, so sad, but also resolute. Nothing will stop her from climbing that mountain road, wherever it leads." Deathmask sighed, his sword arm drooping. "Such was the weakness of our youth." He smiled that stone smile. "The belief that nothing would stop us. If we'd known better, maybe." He shook his head. "But we didn't." In a movement too fast to follow, he grabbed Darien by the throat and lifted him into the air. Black crushed in on Darien's vision, tendrils of it reaching to cover more and more of the world. He couldn't even feel the tears coursing down his face through the pain. "I should kill you now." Deathmask's voice wavered, but Darien couldn't tell if that was doubt or the thunder of his heart over the voice. How would it come to pass then? With a roar, he threw Darien to the ground. "Damn that man! I must follow him. I cannot disobey." Darien lay on the ground, coughing, and still uncertain that he would survive. It was all he could do to focus on gulping down another breath. "Fantasia will kill you for me." He leaned down, his face inches from Darien. "Someone else will see her face, many years from now, but you will be long dead." He left Darien alone in the center of the circle. The cold of the ship coiled around him, and he lay crying until Gent found him and carried him back to his bunk. He dreamed of mountain roads, a woman, and a cavern lined with bodies. Next episode, Darien faces Fantasia in the ruins of a temple. Only one of them can walk away. Thank you for listening to Palace of Mirrors. If you liked the show, please give it a 5-star rating on your platform of choice and share it with anyone you know who might enjoy it. I truly appreciate your support. This podcast was produced, written, and narrated by Matthew Lindquist, with music by Nature's Eye on Pixabay.